On this Friday night, the military's fight against the floodwaters in BC.
That dike has been weakened. To what degree, we do not know that.
Reinforcements rushed to rescue the water-ravaged region as crews face tough decisions over which homes to save. It's official. Canadian kids will soon get a COVID shot in the arm. What parents need to know as Ottawa relaxes the rules for some travelers and moves to recognize more vaccine. The verdict is in.
Members of the jury, are these your unanimous verdicts?
The celebration and indignation at the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. Plus, the big move to small towns.
This is one of the most significant changes in migrant flows since the Industrial Revolution.
What's driving Canadians to the countryside?
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Jeff Semple.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. We begin with breaking news tonight. The BC government has just unveiled new measures to safeguard the gasoline supply in areas hit by this week's catastrophic flooding. Keith Baldrey is in Victoria for us tonight. So Keith, the province has just issued 2 orders under the Emergency Program Act. What do they mean for people in that province?
Yeah, BC Public Safety Minister Mike Farnworth imposing 2 emergency orders. One installs travel restrictions on 2 of the main highways that link Metro Vancouver to the rest of the province, limited to only essential travel and emergency travel. That was expected. What I think caught a lot of people off guard was a form of gas rationing now introduced in southwest BC. Motorists at the pump will be limited to just 30 litres of gasoline per visit to the pump. Minister Farnworth saying this is all about protecting the gasoline supply for emergency vehicles and asking British Columbians to be kind to each other during a very trying time.
I urge British Columbians to be kind and patient at the gas stations. Everyone is doing their absolute best to make sure those who need gas get it. Right now, we all need to do our part to make sure that emergency and essential vehicles can do their jobs.
And Keith, the Trans Mountain pipeline carries most of the gasoline into southwestern BC. So what's its status tonight?
Yeah, it's been down for a few days now, Jeff, because of the flooding. The pipeline passes through where areas are in deep underwater. The good news is, though, the government announced today, Trans Mountain has informed them that they hope the pipeline is up and operating by the end of next week, which is why the gas rationing likely only in place for about 10 or 11 days.
Keith Baldrey with that breaking news in Victoria for us tonight. Thanks, Keith. Yeah. The situation in British Columbia remains critical tonight, especially in Abbotsford, the city about an hour's drive southeast of Vancouver. Now take a look at these new pictures revealing the scale of the damage caused by the flooding. Now this is where the Sumas River dike fell apart. Crews are now working to fill that gap, which is roughly 100 meters wide. The military is rushing in to help. 64 members are now there on the ground, and more are on the way from Ontario and Quebec. Teams are scrambling to contain the damage in a race against time with more rain in the forecast. For the latest on that city's fight against the floodwaters, let's go to Global's Jordan Armstrong, who is in Abbotsford, where officials have just provided an update. Jordan.
They have, Jeff, and here's the latest tonight. There's been a significant change in strategy. A plan to build a 2.5-kilometer long levee on the Trans-Canada Highway has been shelved. It is not going to happen. Instead of a levee, this is now the immediate focus, closing that 100-meter-long break in Abbotsford's major dike. The break is allowing water to flow south over the highway and into the Sumas Valley, where there are hundreds of properties. Now, just yesterday, the city had favored the much larger levee as a way to block the water and ultimately repair the dike, but that plan would have taken more time, and it would have led to the short-term sacrifice of 22 properties in the area between the proposed levee and the broken dike. Here's Abbotsford Mayor Henry Braun with what has changed.
Because the conditions on the ground have changed, the water has equalized on both sides, so we don't have water pouring into the bowl. And so when we learned this new information, we had some options that we didn't have before.
Before the pivot in strategy was announced today, there was a lot of confusion amongst residents. Some didn't know if their property would be spared or sacrificed for a levee.
Very unclear. We don't know what's going on. We're just acting like it's still going to be there, though, so we're still gutting it out and stuff, and just hoping it'll be there, but we don't know what the deal is.
Now, more than one official has used the phrase race against time, and that is because of the weather. Today has been dry. The weekend looks mostly dry. The mayor is confident they can fix the dike, at least temporarily, by early next week when more rain is in the forecast, Jeff.
Jordan Armstrong reporting from Abbotsford, BC tonight. Thanks, Jordan. And it has been a year of record-breaking weather events in BC. Coming up later, we'll look at the connection to climate change and what can be done to avert future disasters. To the pandemic now, and it's the news Canadian parents have been waiting to hear. Children aged 5 to 11 are now officially eligible for Pfizer-BioNTech's kids vaccine. Health Canada issued approval today after its review found the vaccine to be safe and effective. Jamie Mauracher has more on what parents need to know, including how and when the rollout will begin.
Many parents are breathing a sigh of relief. Their kids under 12 will finally be able to get their COVID shots.
After the first dose, I'll be able to relax.
As early as next week, Pfizer says vials of its pediatric formula will start to arrive at vaccine sites across the country. But exact timelines will differ from province to province. It is expected all 2.9 million doses will be delivered by next Friday.
That's enough doses to offer a first shot to all eligible children in this country. We are working closely with Pfizer to firm up the exact schedule for delivery of the second doses.
Health Canada says first and second doses can be given as early as 3 weeks apart, while the National Advisory Committee on Immunization recommends waiting at least 8 weeks. Doctors agree waiting has its benefits.
And actually have a lower risk of something like myocarditis.
Inflammation around the heart, a rare side effect not seen in young kids during Pfizer's latest trial. One of the challenges ahead, getting hesitant parents on board. Kelly Turpin, a Montreal mom with 3 under 10 among them.
I really feel like my instinct is saying, no, you have healthy kids, you're always outdoors, there's no health issue.
So far, more than 2 million American kids have received the Comirnaty vaccine, by and large with only mild side effects, a sore arm or a low-grade fever.
To date, no new safety issues have emerged from the use of Comirnaty in children.
A combination experts say is our best shot at returning to normal. Jamie Mauracher, Global News, Toronto.
And for parents wondering exactly when vaccinations will begin, as Jamie mentioned, the rollout plans will vary by province. In British Columbia, officials expect children's doses to start the week of November 29th. Saskatchewan has said it will be ready to roll out shots as soon as they're delivered. In Ontario, local public health units will be setting up clinics in schools, while in Quebec, officials say the goal is to get first doses to every eligible child by Christmas. And starting November the 30th, Canadians no longer need those pricey PCR tests to return home from quick trips to the United States, as long as they're fully vaccinated and away for less than 72 hours. The government is also expanding the list of accepted COVID-19 vaccines from travelers. David Aiken reports on the new rules.
Just in time for Canadians who want to zip across the border for some Christmas shopping, the federal government is changing the rules for travelers coming back to Canada. Returning travelers will not need a test if they are a fully vaccinated Canadian and have been out of the country for less than 72 hours. Unvaccinated kids with parents qualify for this exemption, which goes into effect November 30th. But all foreign nationals, including Americans, as well as vaccinated Canadians coming back from a longer trip, will still need a molecular test, the most common of which is a PCR test, before arriving at the border.
We are taking a cautious, phased approach to lifting layers of border measures. We are definitely not out of the woods. The pandemic is very much alive all over the world.
Canada is also adding 3 vaccines to the list of those that it recognizes for the purposes of travel: Sinopharm, Sinovac, and Covaxin.
I strongly urge all travelers, Canadian and foreign nationals, to verify all entry requirements before they travel to ensure they meet all mandatory requirements.
Finally, travelers who are currently exempt from entry requirements will need to get vaccinated. This includes professional athletes and essential service providers, including truck drivers. They'll all need to be fully vaccinated by January the 15th or face mandatory quarantine and testing. David Aiken, Global News, Ottawa.
The United States is now offering booster shots for COVID-19 vaccines to all adult Americans. The head of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention signed off on unanimous recommendations from a group of advisors. The decision means anyone 18 and older is now eligible to get Pfizer or Moderna as a booster, though it must be at least 6 months since their second dose. The boosters are expected to begin in the coming days. To Europe now, and an extraordinary move to get more people vaccinated. Austria is set to become the first country in the EU to make COVID-19 vaccines mandatory. Starting in February, Austrians who refuse to be vaccinated could face fines or even prison time. People who can't get the shot for medical reasons will be exempt. 66% of Austrians are fully vaccinated. That's among the lowest rates in Western Europe. With cases surging, the entire country is set to enter another full lockdown on Monday. Germany, meanwhile, is also looking at another lockdown. COVID cases there hit a record high this week, and the country's head of disease control declared a nationwide state of emergency. Officials say hospitals are overstretched and regular medical care can no longer be guaranteed. 67% of Germans are fully vaccinated. To the U.S. now, and a bombshell verdict in a case that has divided the country. A jury has found Kyle Rittenhouse not guilty on all charges. Rittenhouse was 17 when he showed up armed to a racial justice protest last year in Wisconsin. He shot 3 men, killing 2 of them. The teen argued it was self-defense. Jackson Prosco has more on the ruling and reaction.
We, the jury, find the defendant Kyle H. Rittenhouse not guilty.
As the jurors delivered their verdict on each of the 5 counts,
not guilty.
Kyle Rittenhouse was overcome with emotion,
not guilty.
collapsing in the courtroom as the final not guilty was read aloud.
He's not guilty!
Yeah! Outside, jubilation from supporters of the teen.
It validates that we have a Second Amendment right to defend ourselves and protect ourselves.
And anger from the families of the victims and supporters of Jacob Blake. Blake was shot by Kenosha police, touching off the racial justice protests where Rittenhouse shot 3 men, killing 2.
But these jurors saw a different America than we see every day.
The lengthy trial was defined by Rittenhouse's own emotional testimony and by a judge who repeatedly sparred with the prosecution.
That's basic law. It's been basic law in this country for 40 years, 50 years.
Yet it all came down to one central question. Was Rittenhouse acting as a vigilante or in self-defense?
You cannot claim self-defense against a danger you create.
The prosecution portrayed Rittenhouse as a wannabe soldier who went looking for trouble and fame when he showed up armed to the protests.
No serious, credible medic wears an AR-15 slung around their body.
Rittenhouse's lawyers argued the shootings were an act of self-preservation, saying the then 17-year-old traveled to the city from his home in Illinois to protect property from rioters when he was ambushed.
Every person who was shot was attacking Kyle.
Ultimately, prosecutors were unable to convince the jury that Rittenhouse was not acting in self-defense.
The jury system works and we have to abide by it.
Once facing life in prison, the 18-year-old is now a free man, though he still could face civil suits. In a country polarized by issues of race, politics, and gun violence, Rittenhouse will have to choose whether to fade quietly into private life or embrace his newfound infamy. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
In a historic first, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris became acting president today for about 85 minutes as Joe Biden underwent a routine colonoscopy. The brief transfer of power made history, Harris becoming the first woman to temporarily assume presidential powers. She held the authority while Biden was under anesthesia. Biden is the oldest person to serve as U.S. president. He, in fact, turns 79 tomorrow. After massive protests, India's Prime Minister repeals his farming reforms. Coming up, the suspicions about an ulterior motive. Those celebrations erupted in Surrey, BC last night over India's surprise decision to repeal controversial agriculture laws. Crowds of people took to the streets after Prime Minister Narendra Modi buckled under public pressure. For more than a year, tens of thousands of farmers have been fighting 3 laws. They say those rules threaten to destroy their livelihoods. As Crystal Gomansingh reports, Modi's move may have more to do with protecting his party's political future.
Around India, farmers swarmed the streets in victory. Still, they say the government hasn't seen the last of them just yet. When it's completed in writing, only then will we go. This should have been done earlier. About 60% of India's workforce is employed in the agricultural sector. In 2020, when Narendra Modi's government made changes to the legislation claiming to modernize it, farmers rebelled, saying the government was cutting their profits. Demonstrators blocked roads and government offices, and there was violence. Multiple farm unions, which helped to organize the rallies over the past year, say 170 farmers were killed, but that number has not been independently verified. Support rallies were held in several countries, including Canada. I have come to tell you, the whole country, that we have decided to repeal all 3 agricultural laws. Modi's U-turn comes ahead of elections next year in several key states, including Uttar Pradesh. It's the most populous state, and its economy relies on agriculture. Advocates say the move was about the BJP maintaining power.
Not to sound cynical, but it is good, and it's a reprieve in the short term that these farm laws have been repealed. But it wasn't because the government suddenly, is hearing the needs of the common people. It really was a politically motivated decision.
And political fates now lie in the hands of the same farmers labeled as anti-nationals, terrorists, and goons for taking to the streets to protect their livelihoods. Crystal Gomansingh, Global News, London.
From fires to floods, still ahead, BC's extreme weather and the connection to climate change.
You're watching Global National.
Welcome back. 2021 has been a roller coaster of weather extremes in British Columbia. Once in a 100-year events are happening much more frequently, and communities in BC's unique and variable climate are facing calls to do more to plan and prepare. Eric Sorensen reports.
Was it just a coincidence that southern BC baked and burned under a deadly heat dome last summer that killed nearly 600 people, then was inundated with rain and floods less than 5 months later? Both were meteorological extremes that experts not only link to climate change and expect to see more often, but are events that can generate their own chain reaction. The summer heat created conditions to make the rainfall impact worse.
Everything is connected, there's no doubt about that.
The heat of last summer smothered southern British Columbia. In addition to trees burning, vegetation was widely reduced by the lack of moisture. The soil dried, became less capable of absorption. Then came fall rains and early autumn snow that saturated the ground. Days ago, an intense atmospheric river dumped enormous amounts of water quickly. The now oversaturated ground gave way in places, creating landslides, especially in steep areas.
Absolutely, the events in the summer play a role in our winter. Even a heat event can have unintended results.
What is often viewed as an idyllic setting, BC's unique terrain and ecosystem can contribute to different weather extremes.
You have mountains on one side, flat areas, in the middle, and then you have ocean and coastal impacts are all contributing to the severity of these events.
It's heartbreaking. It's livelihoods.
The disaster and the prospect of more climate extremes makes for an uncertain future.
We had our hopes for next year, but now it's all flooded, so we don't know about next year either.
British Columbia has developed a climate preparedness strategy to build more resilience, from forest management to strengthening homes. But decades of construction from the past is not ready for the climate of the future. Enormous investments will have to be made, as well as decisions about where to invest and where to live.
We need to look at all of our existing infrastructure. There are some hard conversations to be had around where people might be in places that are really in harm's way, and they're going to be hard to protect in the future.
Experts believe British Columbians and all Canadians must do more to plan for the climate extremes that are coming, and not just respond when catastrophe strikes. Eric Sorensen, Global News.
Next, rural rush. Canadian urbanites are flocking to small towns and causing big problems. A seismic housing shift is happening across Canada. With the pandemic and an affordability crisis, millennials are leaving big cities to settle in small towns, reversing a decades-old trend. But the change is bringing challenges. Krista Hesse reports from Markdale, Ontario.
During Ontario's first lockdown, Graham DeMarsh and Ashley Patrick left their tiny condo in Toronto behind and bought a home in Markdale.
We are a walking country song. We came, we got the dog, we bought the pickup truck. It's really amazing.
Markdale, a town of just 1,200 people, has exploded since the pandemic began. With many offices remaining closed, young professionals like Ashley and Graham are no longer tied to their desks or their cities.
We really were big city people, and it's a hard change, but it's one that we look back on, and we're very happy we made it.
Rural destinations are no longer this backwater, outdated, outmoded place to live anymore.
Young people were already starting to move to rural Canada before 2020, but experts we spoke with say the pandemic accelerated the trend. Newcomers to Markdale are opening new businesses, and hundreds of homes are being built to keep up with demand.
These towns are alive again. That's the good news. The bad news is that it also, with this rapid price appreciation, it pushes locals out of the housing market potentially.
And that's what's happened in Markdale. House prices have nearly doubled. Ironically, the affordability crisis that people from the city are trying to escape has followed them into the country. It's one of the unexpected consequences of the pandemic, but many locals here are hopeful that in the end, it will enrich this small town. Krista Hesse, Global News, Markdale, Ontario.
And to see more of that remarkable transformation and the new challenges for small town Canada, you can watch Krista's full documentary on the new reality. That's tomorrow at 7 o'clock right here on Global. And that is Global National for this Friday night. I'm Jeff Semple. We leave you tonight with a historic look at the night sky. Those who stayed up late or woke up early this morning got to feast their eyes on this spectacular partial lunar eclipse. It peaked for 3 hours, the longest in centuries. Thanks for watching. Robin Gill will be at the anchor desk with you tomorrow, and I'll see you here again on Sunday. Have a great night.